The marble fountain was burbling when I pulled up to what used to be my empty lot. Brand new mansion, circular driveway, 6-car garage, and right in the center of my legally recorded 15-acre plot that I'd owned for the past decade. A woman in tennis white strolled out with a smoothie in one hand and her phone in the other, waving at me like she was greeting the pool boy. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect ponytail, and she wore sunglasses that probably cost more than most people's mortgage payments. "Excuse me, you're trespassing," she chirped in a sing-song voice that suggested she was used to getting her way. "This is private HOA property now." I reached into my glove compartment and pulled out the laminated copy of my deed that I always kept there. Old habit from dealing with property disputes in my line of work as a real estate attorney. "No," I said calmly, holding up the document. "You built a 900QFT house on my land." She laughed, actually laughed like I just told her the funniest joke she'd heard all week. The kind of laugh that made you want to check if you had something stuck in your teeth. "Oh, sweetie," she purred, lowering her sunglasses to look at me with perfectly mad-up eyes. "This is HO land, has been for years. I'm Patricia Pedden, president of the Riverside Estates HOA, and I personally approved this development. Too bad for her. I wasn't just the landowner. I was also the attorney who'd handled dozens of cases exactly like this one. And Patricia Pedden had just made the biggest mistake of her entitled life. My name is Daniel Morrison, and I bought my forested land outside Riverside Valley 8 years ago. It was remote, quiet, and, most importantly, completely outside the city limits and any HOA jurisdiction. I'd had it surveyed twice, recorded with the county, and the boundaries were crystal clear. 15 acres of untouched forest with a small creek running through it. I visited a few times a year, usually in the fall when the leaves turned gold and red. The plan was always to build a small cabin there, eventually, maybe for retirement, place to escape the chaos of city life and my law practice. The land was pristine, exactly how I wanted it, but Riverside Valley had grown over the years. New developments sprouted up like mushrooms after rain, and with them came the Riverside Estates HOA. And at the helm of that HOA was Patricia Pedden, woman who treated the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. Patricia was legendary in the area for her enforcement of community standards. She once fined a neighbor $500 for having asymmetrical shutters. Another time, she tried to force an elderly couple to remove their vegetable garden because it didn't match the aesthetic vision of the neighborhood. She measured grass height with a ruler and sent violation notices if it was a quarter-inch too tall. When her son-in-law, a real estate developer named Bradley Harrison, pitched her his private estate concept, she immediately set her sights on the perfect piece of land, my land. The fact that it wasn't hers didn't seem to matter. Patricia claimed my parcel was community spillover based on what she called a 1994 HOA expansion map. When I later saw this map during discovery, it looked like someone had drawn it in Microsoft Paint. The boundaries were crooked lines that didn't match any actual survey markers, and mysteriously, my property appeared to be included in their territory without checking public records, without consulting an attorney, without even attempting to contact me. She greenlit Bradley's development plan. She used her position as HOA president to fast-track approvals through their architectural committee, which consisted of her best friend, Margaret, and Margaret's husband, who never showed up to meetings. I was in Colorado handling a case when the bulldozers arrived. My neighbor, an elderly man named Earl, who lived on the adjacent property, tried calling me, but I was in court. By the time I got his messages, they'd already cleared 3 acres of my trees that had been there for over a century. I flew back immediately and drove straight to my property. What I found made my jaw drop. They weren't just building a house. They were building a monument to excess. Marble columns imported from Italy, wine cellar that could hold 1,000 bottles, Brazilian hardwood floors, swimming pools shaped like a butterfly. No permits from the county, no zoning variances, no environmental impact studies, nothing. And yet somehow they'd managed to get utilities connected. The plumbing was installed, power lines were up, and there was even a decorative mailbox at the end of the driveway, labeled the Patans in gold lettering. I immediately went to the HOA office. Small building that used to be a dentist's office. Patricia was there, naturally, sitting behind a desk covered in violation notices she was preparing to send out. "Mr. Morrison," she said, when I walked in, not even looking up from her papers, "I heard you were back in town. I trust you've seen the improvements we've made to that abandoned lot." "My lot," I said, placing my deed on her desk, "which you've illegally developed without my permission." She glanced at the deed like it was a grocery store receipt. "We're asserting historical community rights based on continuous use and improvement doctrine, which is how I speak for we're squatting with style." "Patricia," I said using my courtroom voice, "you've built on private property without permission. That's trespassing, theft, and about 6 other crimes I can think of off the top of my head." She leaned back in her chair and smiled. "Prove it in court, then. In the meantime, security will escort you off HOA property." That was her second biggest mistake. I retained my former law partner, Sarah Chen, one of the best property attorneys in the state. Within 48 hours, we had pulled every record from the county. I was still the sole legal owner. No sale, no transfer, no easement, no lien, nothing. The county building inspector, a man named Frank Rodriguez, who'd been doing this job for 30 years, nearly fainted when we showed him what was happening. Patricia had filed HOA internal forms with pretty letterhead, but no actual permits. She'd claimed the development was a community beautification project that didn't require county approval. Worse, she'd used HOA funds to finance what she called landscaping integration. $75,000 expense listed in their budget as green beautification and community enhancement. In reality, it paid for the mansion's elaborate garden with its fountain and exotic plants. I filed a cease and desist order. Patricia responded by having security guards block my access to my own property with traffic cones and signs reading private HOA use only. Violators will be prosecuted. That was her third and final mistake. I called the sheriff's department. Deputy Martinez arrived within an hour, took one look at my deed and the security guards and shook his head. "Ma'am," he said to the lead security guard, "you're going to need to remove these cones and let this man access his property." "But Patricia Pettin said," the guard started. "I don't care what Patricia Pettin said. This is his land. Move the cones or I'll arrest you for obstruction." The cones were moved. I walked onto my property with Deputy Martinez and a process server. We found Patricia on the faux French patio she had installed, sipping champagne with her son-in-law Bradley. "Patricia Pettin?" the process server asked. "Yes," she said, her voice dripping with annoyance. "You've been served." The look on her face as she read the summons was priceless. Her perfectly composed expression cracked like an egg, revealing the panic underneath. In court, my case was airtight. Judge Thompson, a no-nonsense woman who'd been on the bench for 20 years, reviewed the evidence with increasing disbelief. My deed predated the HOA by 14 years. The property had never been part of any HOA territory. Patricia's historical map was dismissed as the fabrication it was. "Mrs. Pettin," the judge said, peering over her glasses, "did you at any point check the actual property records with the county?" Patricia's lawyer, a nervous young man who kept adjusting his tie, mumbled something about executive interpretation of community boundaries. "That's not what I asked." Judge Thompson said, "Did you check the property records?" I have executive authority as HOA president to make development decisions in the community's best interest, Patricia said, her chin raised. Defiantly, the judge's expression suggested she'd heard enough. She granted me full injunction rights and ordered an independent appraisal of damages. She also opened the door for criminal charges to be filed by the district attorney. But the real fireworks came when I also sued the HOA itself for trespassing, unlawful development, and land conversion. Sarah made sure every HOA member received notice of the lawsuit and specifically highlighted that their dues had paid for Patricia's pet project. The revolt was swift and brutal. Homeowners who'd been living under Patricia's tyrannical rule for years finally had their opening. They called an emergency meeting at the community center, and the turnout was standing room only. Margaret, Patricia's longtime ally, was the first to turn. I had no idea she was using our funds for a personal mansion, she said, wringing her hands. She told me it was for community improvement. One by one, neighbors stood up to share their grievances. The $500 shutter fine, the vegetable garden controversy, the time Patricia tried to find someone for having the wrong shade of beige on their garage door. I move for a vote of no confidence in our current president, said Dr. Peterson, who'd been fined 3 times for his mailbox being too tall. The vote was unanimous. Patricia was removed in disgrace, escorted out of the community center, while shouting about ungrateful peasants and architectural integrity. The civil judgment came 2 months later, $2.30 million in damages, plus full rights to the mansion structure since it was built on my land with illegal funds. Patricia's personal assets were frozen, and the HOA's insurance refused to cover intentional criminal acts. I now owned the 9 OOQFT home she built on my land with her HOA's money. To celebrate, I hosted what I called a reclamation barbecue on the marble patio. Every neighbor from Riverside Estates was invited, and they all came. We grilled burgers and hot dogs while kids played in the butterfly pool. Patricia drove by in her new Prius, her luxury cars having been sold to pay legal fees. She rolled down her window and screamed, "This isn't over. I'll see you for everything." Deputy Martinez, who was off duty and enjoying a burger, walked over to her car. "Ma'am, you just rolled through that stop sign. License and registration, please." The ticket was for $250. I heard later she tried to fight it in court and lost. I turned her wine cellar into a woodworking shop. The fountain was replaced with a koi pond that I named Patricia's Folly. The butterfly pool remains, though I'm thinking of reshaping it into something less pretentious. I now live part-time in the mansion Patricia built for herself. The irony isn't lost on anyone, especially when I host the monthly neighborhood barbecues that bring the community together in a way her iron-fisted rule never could. During the criminal trial, it came out that Patricia had pulled the same scheme twice before in other states, though never on the scale. The prosecution presented evidence of a pattern of fraud and embezzlement spanning 15 years. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts: wire fraud, embezzlement, criminal trespass, and conspiracy. Judge sentenced Patricia to 8 years in federal prison and ordered her to pay $3.7 million in restitution. As the bailiff placed her in handcuffs, Patricia's perfectly composed facade finally shattered completely. 8 years, she shrieked, her voice cracking. But I'm the HOA